right, and welcome everybody to another episode of The Most Important Conversations, where Dan and I are talking about leadership, what it means to be an ontological leader, or what I call a creative leader and or transformed leader. There's many different ways we can kind of talk about this, but all of it goes back to the essence of who are we being as leaders. And in the context of the recent election in the United States and the re-electing of Donald Trump, and I spoke about this a little bit on an earlier podcast as well. I thought it would be, Dan, really kind of as you were saying before we kind of dug in today, a really rich conversation to explore some of the dynamics that are at work here. So as I said on earlier podcasts, so my background is I have degrees in political science, psychology, and communications. And on the political science front, a lot of people kind of hear that and it's like, well, what is that really? Oh, you study politics and political power, political parties and stuff like that. And yes, there is that conversation. But when you really get down to it and understand what political science is political science is actually the study of power dynamics between humans and human groups and how we organize ourselves around power, how we relate to power. How policy gets made around certain definitions of power. And so that's what political science is. It's the study of power. And one of the things I think is really interesting is that, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, if you are, in the area of politics, voters are effectively giving a certain amount of their power away. They're deferring to this group, this party leader, to basically make decisions on their behalf around certain things that presumably will affect their life. And in some cases it does, and in other cases we think it does, but it really doesn't. And so, whenever we are giving our power away, whether we're on the winning or losing side of the political game, the mere fact of giving our power away, the mere act of giving our power away, sets us up to be a victim. Because by definition, a victim is someone that success or failure happens to. It is the happening to us that is the equation that defines victim. So in a weird kind of twist from looking at it from this perspective, even the winners in the Republican Party of Donald Trump's being reelected, success has happened to them because they gave their power to that cause. And in this case, they won, but it's still something happening to them. And so what we really stand for and advocate for is standing in your own power. The ontological conversation that Dan and I are having is that all human beings have the ability and the potential to stand firmly in their power as creators and to be ontological leaders of their own life and in their own life. That you don't have to, in giving away your power and setting up the context for you to be a victim. Because here's the thing, if Donald Trump had not won and Kamala Harris had won, the giving your power away dynamic is still at work, only in this case, as the Republican side, the losing would have happened to you in the same way that in the Democratic side, the losing is happening to them. So politics and power dynamics are all about how power is moved around like a currency. And when we give our power away, we set ourselves up to be a victim. And so what we are talking about today, and Dan, I want to invite you into this to chat a little bit about this, is we want to encourage people to not give their power away. We want to encourage people to stand in their power, understand what that is. And that begins with knowing yourself. And it begins with accepting the mantle of leadership of your own life, and not requiring on these external variables and dynamics around which none of us control, quite frankly. I could look back in history and it has never, ever, 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 ever happened that the political winds moving from one party to another have fundamentally transformed an individual's life forever in perpetuity, because those political winds are always changing and moving and they're dynamic. And the variables around which they depend, no one controls absolutely. And so it's almost mere mythology that if I give my power away to a political cause or a political movement, that my life is going to somehow magically get better. It just has never happened that way. But we keep deluding ourselves into thinking that it does. So I want to pause there and invite you into this dialogue.
Yeah, I think it's really rich, as I said, and opening with you before we started, my comment was, I am the creator and leader of my life, and I exist in the world. But
Yeah.
to what extent the world informs what I am, who I am, what I'm going to believe, that's really me. And
Yeah.
so I lived through the last 4 years. I'm hopefully, other than my age, will live through this 4 years. And that's not to say that certain decisions won't affect me. And in a corporation and an enterprise, there are going to be decisions that affect me.
Mhm.
Whether or not I
But they
live.
don't define you.
So right. So in the enterprise, if it's top-down command and control, do as you're told, coercive power to disempowerment, that's a theater in which I've chosen to play.
Mhm.
I used to play in that theater. I don't play there anymore because it didn't, after a while, it wasn't who I was and it didn't serve me. So
Mhm.
I went out on my own, and I am much happier living my dream and being authentic to who I am than playing in a different theater where who I am probably can't show up much. So I can have more engagement, I can have more connection, I can be more aligned to my values, and I am responsible for the outcome. I was responsible for the outcome in a corporation, but there was just a lot of stuff that came on. And so when I look at elections, to me, I'm looking at values, right?
Mhm.
One of the things we talked about, and what came up in this election and has come up in multiple elections, is this identity politics idea. How will Hispanics vote? How will men vote versus women? How will young people versus old people? There's all of this dynamic that people are after. And my comment to you was, after a while, we're just all American. And I'm wondering, in an enterprise, there are cliques. So I worked in a company where there was a chairman, and you had to pick sides between the chairman and the vice chairman,
Mhm.
right? So you're either on one side or the other. Whichever side you're on, you're at a disadvantage with the other group. And
Mhm.
that level of toxicity and politics and, disarray was enormous. And they loved the model because the people up here were the ones who got to drive the bus, right?
Mhm.
We sitting in the back, seatbelts weren't enough, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So I think the idea would be, in a corporation or an enterprise, how are we all Nike? How are we all Ford? How are we all Caterpillar? How are we all Harley Davidson? Not who are we, these little clique ideas, and still be true to who our values are.
Yeah.
So that we get to show up, that we're in an environment that actually celebrates who you are and what you have to offer. And the way I see that coming forward is, how do you hire?
Mm.
One of the questions that I was entertaining this week with a group was, regardless of who's on the team, should we accept them exactly for who they are? It depends. Can
Mhm.
they be a team player? Maybe they're not. Maybe they're, a renegade. Maybe no matter which way we go, it's never the right way. And so there's team chemistry. So how do we take a look at that? My comment is, I don't want you to be wrong. You just may not be a fit. And therefore,
Yeah.
when we look at an enterprise, are we hiring for functional expertise, or are we hiring for fit?
Right.
Since we tend to hire 50% incorrectly, I would argue that the human nature of, I hire who I like,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
That's a whole different, and now I'm the victim of my decision.
Mhm.
And now what do? I've just destroyed a life because I've got to say, I'm sorry, you're not a good fit.
Right. Right.
Is that person now the victim? Am I now the victim? We're both the victim. But this power thing is this dynamic. And I think that, and I also think, to be fair, in any election or in any corporate idea, that there's a thing about honoring the emotions of the moment. So if we were to take a look at what happened yesterday, there are charged emotions out there. There's grief, possibly. There's disappointment. There could be heartbreak. There could be discouragement. There could be trauma. There could be rage. There could be anger. There could be fear. And to what extent am I willing to have those conversations? So again, ontologically, people get to show up for who they are. And this really works in a family dynamic as well. How many kids did we do as you're told? I'm the dad, and I told you, therefore you do it. That's a pretty disempowering idea. So if we're going to be ontological leaders, then we're going to need to individuate, become the individual that we are, and have a voice. And so as a leader, I might be in an enterprise, but today might be a day just to have a good conversation, to put the business on hold for a couple of hours and lead and let people have their voice.
Yeah. Well, I think that true leaders, this is, my definition, true leaders are people who are centered, grounded, and responsible with their own power. And they are not giving it away. And they are able, a true leader is able to flow and be dynamic and adaptive with whatever the circumstances, the variables that are showing up are presenting themselves as. A true leader is someone who would be able to work with both sides of a debate because they're not identified with either side. They haven't given their power away to either side. See, as soon as you give your power away to something, you're invested in it. Think of power as currency. If I give my power to the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, it's a form of currency that I've given them. I'm investing in them. And as soon as I invest in them, now whatever happens to me as it pertains to that investment. That investment is either going to succeed or it's going to fail. I'm going to win or I'm going to lose. And as soon as I invest in something with my power, my identity quickly becomes attached to it because I'm invested in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we want to stand in a place of power and be true leaders, we have to be really cautious about what we invest in, intentional in what we invest in. Because of the nature of investing energy and power, which is a form of currency, and the proclivity to become attached to the thing we've just invested in. People who are the most powerful people in a company aren't in the C-suite. They're the people who have the ear of the C-suite and also bridge the rest of the company. And they're able to take in all of these different perspectives and data points. They're liked by both sides, both camps. They're seen as a trusted advisor, a trusted confidant, a trusted person who is able to speak to all sides. That's the most powerful person. The most powerful people are not the people necessarily based on title or are in the winning camp. Because the winning is like the wind. It's there one day and it's gone the next. No one's winning all the time. That's a fallacy. So if your leadership and your source of power is dependent on whether or not you're winning, you're a victim. Because as soon as you're not winning anymore, you're losing and it's happening to you. So it's about retaining our power core and being able to work. I think the most powerful people in the United States right now are people who can work with both Republicans and Democrats. It's not about agreeing with everything. It's about being able to work with creatively to create something that's advantageous for the most people possible.
Yeah, and I think, as I look at what's a great leader is someone, like you said, it's grounded and centered, but it's someone in their creativity. It's someone who owns their power. It's someone who's resilient, but they see the same thing in the other people that they're dealing with. And if they see someone not in their creativity, not in their power, not being resilient, then as a leader, I think part of my job is to reinforce that for them so that it elevates. Because when they're in their creativity and it's driving innovation and it's driving engagement and it's driving connection and it's driving teamwork, I have a much better game in which to play. And I
Totally.
think this idea of being an ontological leader is the self-awareness. I can't be more self-aware for you than I am for myself.
Right.
So I actually need to do my work so that in the moment, I know what's going on with me.
Hmm.
Oh, they won. You know what? And I could start blaming and, you know, I have no advocacy for that. I have no intention of that. I have no any kind of openness to say that, this could work or whatever. If I'm doing that, how am I leading a team of people?
Hmm.
Not very well,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So I think this about openness, but I really see this as a thing of the more self-aware I am, the more self-accepting I can be of my own values, my own system ideas, my own how this should work idea. The real question is, can I be more interested in what you think than what I already know what I think? That's not the
Yeah.
hard part. The hard part is, can I be in my heart enough? I really want to know, Chad, what you think. And then when you
Hmm.
start talking, I want to actually be listening to you. I don't want to be already, he's wrong. I need to respond to this. I need to cut him off. I need to do all this little triggered stuff, right?
The ambush listening. The ambush listening. I'm only listening so that I know how to ambush you, not because I'm actually hearing you.
Right.
Yeah.
And what would it mean to me as a leader to have enough self-confidence to want to take in these other positions? Like I said, I already know what I know.
Hmm.
That's not helpful. What's helpful now is we're building something. Can I bring people in together to build with me? Or am I telling the carpenter what to do and the plumber what to do and the electrician what to do? If I'm
Hmm.
doing everything for them, I'm not building much.
Yeah. 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 I think this is it's a good conversation and it's timely because I would like to invite listeners and watchers to consider what we're saying as an off ramp to the frenetic identity politics like you were talking about. And identity politics is not just the obvious identity, man, woman, black, white, this sort of thing. Identity politics is even party, is even the fact that there's an other. Whenever we're identifying with one side, we're othering another side.
Mhm.
And I think, incidentally, actually, the movement or the trend in the United States with the increasing number of independent voters is an interesting phenomenon because to me, those are people who are saying, I'm tired of othering the other side. And I'm actually just interested in what are the best ideas to move our society forward. And I'm going to vote on the best ideas and the best exemplification of leadership from moment to moment. I'm not going to be baked in to one side or the other as an identity.
Yeah, and I think, when you look at identity, what does that really mean? And to me, what it means is that you have a value system. So if you're on one side of the fence, there are a bunch of core values that are there. And when you see the other side, it feels like they're attacking your value system. That's really, to me, the identity play. And so I think as a leader, we talked about this, like, what are your cardinal values? What are the real principles, the red lines that you don't want to move beyond? Do you even know what they are, or have you just been fed them, right?
Totally.
So how do I really start to figure out these values that I want to build my life on? So I've been doing some work around the Stoics, right? So courage, honor, loyalty, but really, self-awareness was the whole idea behind the Stoics. So, and then when you look at the values that you have, where'd you get them? Did you get them from family? Were they downloaded? Did you get them from your own experience of being hurt? So now you've got the walls of values to make sure you don't get hurt anymore. Where did they really come from? And how do they change? Do they change for you at all? Are you just stuck? Do you have a growth mindset about it? Or nope, this is the way it has to be, and I don't have any ability to change. And so one of the things about leading and one of the things about being in an organization, can I tolerate discomfort? Can I tolerate the idea that someone could conflict with me? Because our growth actually happens far more in discomfort than it happens in everything just moving along because we all are the same, right?
Absolutely. Well, the two big underlying intentions or drivers of most people's behavior, at least subconsciously, is the avoidance of discomfort and the avoidance of effort. And this is sort of the natural human state. Now, we can develop ourselves to move beyond that, but most people want to avoid effort, want to avoid discomfort. And so I think the question also that you're asking about, where do people's values come from? That's a really important exercise that everybody should take on and really ask themselves, why do I value this thing? And why am I trading my life force energy for it? I mean, do I authentically, ontologically, as a being, as my own unique being, value this thing? Or have I just been taught to value this thing?
Yeah. So, for example, a value could be hard work. And you've taken the value on to the extreme. I'm not allowed to have play in my life. I just have to work hard. I just have to achieve. I just have to create affluence. I just have to have affirmation from the outside because I haven't figured out how to even do it for myself. Right? So when we look at these value systems, they actually subconsciously drive our behaviors.
They do. Everything.
What's your value around money? I love money. Why? Well, money gives me freedom. Money gives me the chance to invest in causes that I like. Money, blah, 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 blah. Oh, I was taught we're in scarcity. Money's dirty. Money is not used for the common good, blah, 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 blah. And then you're sitting there with a life and living in scarcity subconsciously. I think the way both of us view it is that if we're the creator of our life, and you're sitting in a world of, I don't have enough money, you're just creating that. It's
absolutely
not money out there. We're borrowing $1 trillion every 100 days. Trust me, there is more than enough money out there.
Yeah.
So I think that, and when does a corporation sit down with its teams and really speak to the value system that it's going to run on? And is it really aligned? And if you go into an enterprise and you ask the teams, what are the 3 things that if you did, your CEO would be the most proud of, that would leverage the business the most, that would give everybody here the greatest advantage? I've never seen an enterprise where people are aligned and can answer those 3 questions.
Yeah, no, it's well, part of the problem is that when we get this drift from the original intent of the company and the enterprise. So as it exists in time and space over time, like I look at Apple as a great example. So, Steve Jobs, creator, founder, really connected to why he wanted to create Apple, what he felt its purpose, its calling in the world was. And even the journey he took of founding it and then being fired from it and then being rehired back in as the CEO to try to save it from bankruptcy. And then in that moment, completely turning it around and creating some of the most innovative products in the 2000s before he passed away. That's someone who's really connected to their value and what they wanted to deliver to the world. And then as it gets transmuted and transposed to other people who are expected to pick that up, we drift from it, it gets diluted, and we start not really being connected to the values of why we existed in the first place, right? And so that's even, as great as I think Tim Cook has been as a manager of Apple and sort of managing its growth and keeping the ship, afloat, there also hasn't been really any profound innovation in, since Jobs died, quite frankly. There really hasn't. And I think that's just an example, but that's when people get disconnected from the value of why they're there in the first place and what the purpose of all this is and the calling of this company or this enterprise, that you get that all over the place. I mean, if the leadership doesn't know what it is and isn't connected to it, good luck getting anyone else, connected into that as well.
Yeah, and what you're talking about really, as much as it's the value system, it's the energy. Steve brought an energy. So I've been with Starbucks 40 years, right? And they now the fifth guy in like 6 years, and Howard's come back 3 times because they keep hiring professional managers. Managers are accountability jockeys to Wall Street. That's what they are. Those aren't CEOs in my mind. I'm sure this is confronting.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm willing to take the pressure.
Yeah.
So anyway, I had a thing, and they sent me a survey, and they said, what would you like us to know? And I said, well, first of all, what I'd like you to know is that you have no clue as to what the origin and the DNA of the brand is. And I explained what I thought it was. And I said, basically $7 for a cup of coffee today, that price value relationship, this is why you're saying people aren't coming for $7 coffee when they can make it at home for $1, right? Yep. Your bakery is 10 years old. You've shrunk the size and you raised the prices, and it's not even tasty, right? So, but here's where I also
and there's one other important thing on Starbucks, just to interject. They were really clear at one point in time at being the third place, the place between work and home. It was a place of being able to connect to and build community. And now I've read, even as recent as this past year, I don't know if it's happening across all Starbucks locations, but I know some of them are removing a lot of the seating, limiting the amount of seating, hoping people don't hang out there very long. That's totally disconnected from what I always remember and experience Starbucks to be as a culture.
Right. And that was the last thing that I said. So your biggest advantage for COVID is your biggest liability after COVID. What was it? You had that core application where people could order and just stop in, pick up, and get out, so they didn't have to sit there. And what happened out of that is you've changed your whole design of stores now. You've taken the seating out. You've basically said, you're not wanted here. Come in, pick up, and leave. Right?
Yeah.
So sometimes these things happen in our own evolution. And what was really interesting to me when I read about McNichol, who's the new CEO that came out of Chipotle, and I'm sure this was just journalism. How'd you get the job? And he said, I told Melody Hobson, who is married to George Lucas, who's on the board, who called him to see if he'd make the switch. The article said, I told her I know what to do, and he got hired. Now, I doubt it was that simple, but it might have been. Just because of the desperation, right? So I think as we take a look at this stuff, Procter & Gamble brought back Ed Lafley, I think 3 times. Never as good the second or the third. Bob Iger is now back at Disney. Never as good as the first one, right? And we can see this all over, this idea of cult CEO, of star CEO. We're past that now. The world is way too complex, way too much speed of change, way too much technology that we're not adapting to fast enough. And this is really the opportunity in leading, is to see the leadership in the team that you hired. Why did you hire them? And to what extent have you institutionalized them? And to what extent have you given them free rein?
Yeah.
In a $100 million company, it would be very hard for any team member to do something that would collapse the company.
Right.
It'd be almost impossible.
Yeah.
So that's the opportunity, I think, is why did you hire? And then the other feeling I have is we hired to this functional expertise. So we hired you for your functional expertise and what you could do, and we fire you for who you are.
Right.
You don't fit in. You're disruptive. You don't color inside the lines. You're taking risks that we're not really ready to do. All of these different things. This is power that is minimizing.
Hmm.
And out of that minimization is disengagement, is sabotage, is lack of resilience, is burnout. I talk to people all day long and they all say we are so overstressed in what's
Hmm.
being now required of us
Hmm.
is inhuman.
Yeah. And we've been seeing, even through COVID, the breakdown as a result of all of that. People have reached the limit. They've had enough. I did a talk for BIFMA a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I think. And they're the Association for Furniture Manufacturers in the United States. So Herman Miller and Steelcase and groups like that. And they're really struggling, as an industry, because since COVID, people aren't going back to work and therefore they're not ordering office furniture. And as an industry, they're really wrestling with, well, is this a temporary thing or is this a new normal? In which case we need to completely rethink our entire business model, because we need to start thinking about, retail furniture, furniture that's not for the office, but it's for the home. And I said to them, well, here's the reality, whether we like it or not. I don't see us going back to work in the same way that we did before COVID. I know there's a lot of companies trying to make that happen, but it just hasn't happened. And the longer that this goes on and the more people are used to working from home, and by the way, all of the research points to the fact that there's not a lessening of productivity from working at home. If anything, it's neutral in the same or more productivity. So your justification for requiring people to come back and be observed at work is certainly not based on productivity. And in addition to that, the formula for productivity is about to be changed and turned totally on its head, because we're moving from a productivity-based economy to a creative-based economy. When the productivity is going to be automated because of AI and all of these things, what we need in companies are creators who are collaborating and creating what's the next thing we're going to create, that we're going to get AI and robotics and machine learning and all of this stuff to take care of. We don't have to do this anymore. We're moving from a state of an economy based on human doings back into an economy of human beings. Well, what does that mean? What does it mean to be human if we're not human doers? Because the AI and everything is doing the doing now, right? And so the metrics and the value system that you're talking about are about to go through another massive transformation when we haven't even recovered from the last transformation. And so we need leaders more than ever. We need creative leaders who are tapped into their creativity, ontological leaders who are connected to their authentic source of being, what they value, who they are, what their calling, what their purpose is. They're leading from that place, and they're encouraging others in the company that they are, say, a leader of, to also be leaders. It's no longer top down. We need leaders right across the board. And so I see it as a profound and tremendous opportunity for those who want to step into it.
Yeah, and I think that I think we've talked about this idea of what does it mean to be a multidimensional leader? Well, what does it mean to be a multidimensional enterprise? So we've been living in what I call a three-dimensional world where the whole purpose of the enterprise was shareholder value. There was nothing multidimensional about that. That was the only thing that mattered. What matters for a brand is not the product underneath it, it's the promise that sits up here. So now as AI takes over workflow and boring and remote and repetitive work, and like you said, the KPIs for productivity will still be there. There needs to be a whole new definition of what is a successful enterprise. It has to include the people. It has to include the markets. It has to include vendors, channels of distribution, right? All this multi-dimensional idea, the silos aren't going to make it work. What's going to make it work is a much more holistic, multi-dimensional play where people show up in different dimensions of the enterprise. It's going to require different, I hate the word KPIs, but it's going to require different ideas of what is success in this new world. I don't know that it's defined yet. I don't think it is. I certainly don't have it myself. But what I know is if you want to have a great organization going forward, you're going to need to have, it's like writing a book. If I'm James Patterson and the only one who gets to write is me, I'm having a James Patterson book. If you have a big enterprise, that's not going to be the most successful way to bring a book to market.
Right. And so just kind of looping back where we started as we kind of wrap up today in the scenario that we're talking about here, the dynamics of power and the leaders standing in their power and not divesting it, but instead encouraging others to also stand in their power inside of a company, inside of an enterprise. That's where we're headed right now. We need powerful people to be working collaboratively and creatively to actually be able to create solutions, products, and services that can be so adaptive to the changing dynamics of the market, knowing that whatever gets created can be produced and implemented now more effectively and efficiently than ever in human history because of the onboarding of AI and all of these other technologies that are increasing our productivity. But the interesting thing is, productivity in and of itself can no longer be the metric, because think of it. If what used to take me a week to produce as an employee inside of a company now takes me 10 minutes because I use AI, is productivity still the measure of my value? It took me 10 minutes. It doesn't take me a week. You're paying me for 10 minutes of work. So no, we've got to shift everything to how do we empower people in our enterprise, employees in our enterprise, to be leaders in and of themselves? And to be a leader means to necessarily be a creative force, a collaborative force around which the enterprise needs its people to be engaged with in order to create the products, the services, the solutions that they are then selling out into the market.
Yeah, because if you're looking at productivity, the reason I think there's so much burnout and overwhelm is corporations have said, if I've got $100,000 of productivity per employee, I need $125,000. So I'm just going to keep loading it on. But with AI, right, you could have $1 million worth of productivity, and basically you only need $60,000 now to get the same $1 million of productivity. Right. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And so I think that reworking of what is work is going to be pretty interesting to see how that all works out. And as a CEO, do you have that creativity within you? Because it's going to have to kind of start up here and trickle into where we're going to end up.
Yeah, well, and that's a great way, speaking of end up, that's a great way to end our session today, because that's effectively not only why we do these podcasts, but it's why we do the work that we do with Design Lab and the whole life architecture and the ontological leadership, creative work to actually help people become those ontological, those creative leaders, standing in their own power, no longer divesting it, giving it away, and setting themselves up to be the victim. I think a lot of the CEOs that we were talking about who were once superstars and are now struggling to find their way in these current market dynamics have, in effect, kind of been set up to be the victims of this particular moment in time, because all the power was given away from the enterprise to them. Here, you fix it, you solve the problem. And they can't, because things are changing so dynamically. And so everyone needs to take a step back and look at, how do we meaningfully create a company and an organization that can be adaptive, that can evolve, that can be responsive to the market dynamics that are now happening monthly, not even quarterly anymore or annually. I mean, we need to be so adaptive. And just coming back to Starbucks as a way to kind of wrap it up, I think Starbucks would do very well to kind of go back in some respects to being that third place where community can be created, because people need to start interacting again. People need to start sharing ideas again. And that's how we create the conditions for people to realize their own leadership qualities, their own creative qualities, by connecting with one another. If we're all just in silos in our own houses and we're working remotely, and we're disconnected from each other, this is not going to be a way to create an enterprise that is adaptive and creative. So we need to find ways of working together.
And one of the biggest issues for a CEO is am I going to be the one to take the business model that has worked for all this time? It's a legacy system. Am I going to be the one to say we're going to get rid of that legacy and now we're going to start something new? It's the same thing we see. We know that Social Security is going to go bankrupt, but that'll be the next Congress to take care of it.
That's their problem, yeah.
Right? And that is a power dilution and there's so much more opportunity. The other thing, just to give some insight for folks, Jassy has basically said at Amazon, everybody has to come back to work. The workforce, 70% of people said, I will be looking for a new job. Why do you think Jassy said that? Most people would think he just wants everybody back at headquarters. That's not what he wants. Did you hear about a thing called quiet quitting?
It's been going on a few years.
Firing. See, if you leave, I don't have an unemployment problem, and I'm no longer the CEO that just got rid of 15,000 people in my
enterprise. Because you chose to leave.
Yeah. So there's this whole thing going on, and then we see office buildings now saying, I'm going to do commercial condos and all these different things, and they aren't coming from foresight of saying this is the world where it's going. They're going to go out of business. They're going to lose their real estate if they don't very rapidly figure out this new model so they can pay the banks back.
Right.
We don't want you as an ontological leader to be in that kind of crisis. We'd like you to actually be out in front.
Absolutely. And the only way to be out in front is to create the front, right? So you get to create it as opposed to react to it. Well, Dan, as always, is a pleasure jumping into these really interesting conversations about leadership. They're needed. These conversations are needed more than ever right now, because as we step further into the unknown, we need leaders to be able to create what's possible in that unknown future. And the only way you can do that is by tapping into your authentic creative self and being a leader and being bold enough to stand in the gap, so to speak. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us on this episode as usual. And we will see you again on the next episode of The Most Important Conversations.
That concludes this episode of The Most Important Conversations. This in-depth conversation could set you on the path to self-improvement, which is essential if you want to be an effective leader and take meaningful action in your life. If you enjoyed this episode and want more of these stimulating discussions, you can find them at TMICglobal.com. Remember, the world is at a crossroads right now. You can't afford to waste this opportunity to take charge of your life, build meaningful relationships with others, and co-create a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for listening. See you on the next one.